All right, so I'm just gonna say all that again. To get to this page here, it's under your phase 1, under the milestones module, you'll see phase 1 project online, and that will bring you to this page. The other thing that you might see is the project submission and review, and these are all like instructions for submission and review. And I'll go through all of this during an office hour next week, so not to worry about that. Cool. So that's where everything is. Let's start talking about the project. So I'm actually going to go through the prompt of the project. You'd be surprised how many people don't fully read this. But yeah, so here we can see that the phase 1 project, I'm going to skim it as well, but around 20 to 25 hours of work. This 20 to 25 hours is for solo work. So I imagine for pairs, it'll take a little bit less time, just so you know. All right, so let's talk about the business problem. The business problem, I think at some 101s, I've been talking to some of you about this, but let's start. Microsoft sees big companies creating original video content and they want to get on the fun. They have decided to create a new movie studio, but Microsoft doesn't know anything about creating movies. So they have hired you to help them better understand the movie industry. So your team is charged with exploring what type of films are currently doing best at the box office. And then you must then translate those findings into actionable insights that the head of Microsoft's new movie studio can use to help decide what type of films to create. Questions about that so far? So pretty straightforward. Basically, the idea is to recommend to Microsoft what they should be doing with their new movie studio. I will say it's very, very open-ended. It does say what type of films are currently doing best at the box office, but what does it mean to do well at the box office? Maybe is like, I guess most obviously people would think about revenue, but also there are like different popularity metrics for movies. I think in here you actually have like a Rotten Tomatoes data set. You have, I think you have like IMDb reviews or something. So all of that data you can use to help answer this question. So the data that is provided in the folder zip data, and I'll walk through that in a little bit, but you'll be provided with data sets from Box Office Mojo, IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, as I just mentioned, as well as the movie database. So these are data sets that have already been collected. They're already in CSVs. Downside is a little bit outdated and not the cleanest. So kind of up to you, pick your poison whether you want to deal with that. Or you also have the option of getting additional data using APIs or web scraping. So I have a couple resources I'll share later that are good resources for scraping or APIs to get additional data. These are good tables to start with if you're like feeling very overwhelmed by the data. I'll again show you like all of the CSVs that are provided, but they recommend that these are the ones that you start looking at to, you know, get your feet wet. So yeah, questions about the data. I don't know if anyone's started looking at it yet, but I'll walk through like the GitHub process and we'll see what that looks like. All right, so deliverables. So there are 4 deliverables for this project. A GitHub repository that right after this, I'm going to actually walk you through how to set it up and how to keep your project progress on GitHub. A Jupyter notebook that is part of your GitHub repository. And during some of the office hours, I'll talk about how that should be structured. A non-technical presentation slide deck. So if y'all see on your class calendar, not this coming Monday, but next Monday, there's actually a time at our usual study group time for project presentations. So you will all be presenting your projects as pairs to the rest of the class. So you'll have this non-technical presentation slide deck. You will also have to submit a recording. So with this recording, usually we have students record themselves and then just submit it as like a YouTube video or whatever. But because we have this presentation hour, I'm just going to record that. And you just let me know if you'd rather record it on your own. I won't record your presentation during that hour. So when it comes to submitting the recording, you can just like submit any dummy link because I won't even look at that unless you tell me that you want to submit your own recording. Again, as like the time for submission comes closer, I will go over all of these again. All right, so just to walk through really quickly what we're looking at with the GitHub repo, we've seen GitHub repos. I think this itself is the GitHub repo for this project. You will basically have your own version of this for this project. Each pair of you will have your own version of this, and I'll again talk you through how to set it up such that both of you can work on a single repo. With that, that will have, yeah.
For the recordings, are those going to be something companies can look at in the future, or is that just for like Flatiron?
That's really up to you. So so for the recordings, I know some students actually like to take the recordings and put them on LinkedIn. That's really up to you. Usually not for the first project, but that's something that you can do. Also, it is submitted to Flatiron so that we can do like, sometimes we do like an internal review of like how we're grading students. So that's also used for that purpose. But it is also good to have a recording of yourself presenting so that you can, get a sense of what you sound like when you're presenting and things that we can improve on. And your presentation is also something that I will be giving feedback on.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. So your GitHub repo contains a bunch of things. It contains, well, as an example, your GitHub repo will have your notebook that has all the things that you've been working on. It's also going to have a README. And so I don't know if I've talked about READMEs yet, but every GitHub repo has a README, which is literally this. And it's basically what a person coming to your GitHub repo will first see. So I'll talk about what a GitHub project README would look like for a data science project during one of the office hours. So basically you would be writing something like this as like a summary to your project that someone who's just coming across your GitHub can read and find out more about what you were doing. So that's GitHub. Your Jupyter Notebook. So in our Jupyter Notebook, this project is an EDA project. The term EDA came up when we were talking about visualizations, but EDA stands for Exploratory Data Analysis. So what we're doing with this project is we're taking all this data that doesn't really make too much sense yet, making visualizations out of it after cleaning it, and then trying to turn those visualizations or any analysis into actionable insights. So that entire process should be clear in your Jupyter Notebook. So a bunch of specifications here. First, it has to be organized and clean. I haven't looked at all your Yelp API notebook yet, but I saw a couple where you have error messages here and there, testing a bunch of functions up and down, which is, I mean, for the first thing that you've submitted, that's completely fine. I'm not going to nitpick on that, but for a project, you want it to be a little cleaner, a little bit more organized, and I will talk about that during one of the office hours as well. So it should be well organized, easy to follow, and code should be commented where appropriate. Commenting your code is very, very important, especially for projects, so that people who are looking at GitHub repo know what functions are doing without having to read every line of your code. And also for projects, especially the first project, a lot of students go back and work on them afterwards and make them better. And a lot of times students only have time to do this after graduation. Just imagine all the things that we're learning in the first 4 weeks. 16 weeks out, you're not going to remember what you were doing this week. So good idea to comment your code so that when you get back to it, it'll be easy to dive right back into editing whatever it is that you want to fix. So just to clarify the audience for your Jupyter Notebook, it's technical audiences for them to understand your approach and reproduce your results. All right, so that's the organization of your notebook. Next, visualizations. So your project should contain at least 4 meaningful data visualizations with corresponding interpretations. And then of course, they have to be well labeled with labels, title, legend when appropriate. So here it says you must pose at least 3 meaningful questions and answer them through EDA. Because you guys are working in pairs, I'm gonna say 4 to 5 questions. The kinds of questions that you can ask include things like, all right, what genres are the most profitable? Or something like, are there specific directors that are known to have like a high ROI? So the insight that you have doesn't have to come directly from the visualization. but you can have steps of inference from the visualization to your insight. So your visualization doesn't have to immediately be clear what it is through your visualization, but hopefully you can derive some insight from that, if that makes sense. All right, so yep, each question has to be clearly answered. Well, this is a level, but each question preferably will be clearly answered with a visualization that makes the answer easy to understand. Some questions might take several visualizations, and so it's up to you how you want to structure that. And then your notebook should contain 1 to 2 paragraphs briefly explaining your approach to this project. I will say for first projects, the focus isn't really about how well your notebook reads. A lot of the first project feedback that I give is about how to present this better. So I wouldn't worry too much about the organization of your notebook for this project, because a lot of it, I think you have to go through the project process first. But try your best, and then we'll talk about those things during feedback. Very quickly, for non-technical presentation, I'll actually be doing a quick session. I think Dara as well will be doing a session about non-technical presentations, but I'll also be providing like a quick template of how to structure a presentation. So I wouldn't worry too much about this now. But the main idea I want to get across for presentations is the target audience, whereas the notebooks were for technical audience, the presentations were a non-technical audience. And even in the prompt, it says that even in the prompt, you're translating these findings to the head of Microsoft's new movie studio. So this guy may or may not know data science or be like data literate. So it's up to you to make it as non-technical as possible. Those things to keep in mind. But I will, of course, during office hours, reiterate all the important things. Getting started, I'm not going to talk too much about now, but any questions on anything so far?
Those data visualizations need to be in the notebook or in the slide deck?
Both. So,
Both.
So the thing is, the process you'll probably be doing is you'll probably be working through your project in your notebook, and then when you'll probably be putting together your slides at the very end. So then you'll probably just end up like screenshotting your slides, your visualizations, and then throwing them onto your slides.
And it's just going to be one notebook that answers all 5 questions?
So I'm going to talk about the notebook situation, but it doesn't have to be all in one notebook. I know some people like to do, all your cleaning in one notebook, and then all the analysis is another. It's up to you how you want to structure it. It's really subjective. I have seen groups that do like 1 question per notebook. I will say that's sometimes hard to navigate as well, but up to you. It depends how you set it up.
And I just wanted to clarify, you said that for the presentation, both people should present, correct? Both partners?
Yes, both partners should be presenting. I think usually you just talk about which questions you answered, which again, I'll talk about like how the splitting up of work and how that usually looks. But yeah, both people should be presenting. Sarah, I think you were talking, but we can't hear what you're saying. It's like really soft. I don't know if it's just me. I can mildly hear you if you like say your question.
So it's just one GitHub repository with a Jupyter notebook inside of it, and then like a PowerPoint to present like slides.
Yep. So in your GitHub repo, you will have you'll have your notebook or multiple notebooks. You'll have a PDF of your presentation, as well as a README file, and all these things I'll talk about.
Okay.
All right. What else?
And so it's one deliverable, like one notebook for both people, one deck of slides for both people.
So yes, one deck of slides for both people, one GitHub repo for both people. I know some pairs actually like to split up. All right, these are my questions. These are the other person's questions. I will say for like, if you intend on putting this on your portfolio, it doesn't look as good to have it like very disjointed between the 2 people's work. So, I mean, that's always something that you can come back and fix afterwards. But for easier workflow, that's sometimes what people do. Like person A works on their own notebook, person B works on their own notebook. And there's probably like one cleaning notebook where they export the clean CSVs and then they work off of that. I'll talk about those processes in a bit as well. All right, what else? I think some things will be clarified as I like walk through the setting up of the GitHub repo, which I'm about to do.
So do you feel like the majority of the time is spent on cleaning and answering the questions, and then you do the deck and the presentation?
Yes, so actually like cleaning takes up most of the time, either cleaning or if you're using an API to get data. Those two steps actually take up most of the time. So I'm actually going to send out right after this a doc with a bunch of guidelines that I've written out. And in my guidelines here, I'll send this out to you all later. No, this is not you guys. This is my other cohort, but this one is you guys, these dates. So I actually have a suggested project timeline of having data cleaned by, I think this is the Wednesday. Yeah, so most of the project will be actually data cleaning or data gathering. And then analyses you'll see because you already have your data, plotting graphs from data that already exists wouldn't take as long. And then we'll see when we get to the office hours that talk about the slides in the README. Those don't take very long either because all the information should already be in your notebook. You're just taking that information and putting it somewhere else. Yeah, I'll send out this right after this because I also want to walk through some of these things. Other questions? All right, so now I'm gonna walk through setting up a GitHub repo. Each group has to do this once, setting up the GitHub repo. So one person will create the repository and just add the other person as a collaborator. Other than this, I have also added to your study group repo all of these instructions. So don't have to worry about like taking notes right now. But all of these instructions that I'm going to be talking about, and honestly, I will be following these instructions as I'm doing this process. They are, have I pushed it? Let me check really quick. No, I should have. Let me see. Oh, right here. It's here. It's not within phase one, but it's here. It's this project workflow doc that I've created that has a bunch of Git commands and basically how to work off of GitHub. And to be honest, I'm going to be following this as I set this up as well. And this is already on your study group GitHub. All right, so to set up your GitHub, again, instructions are provided, but I'm just going to go through this right now just in case there are any questions to clarify. One person in your pair or in your group will create the repo. So later on, just decide who will do this. And this person will just do new repository. Now, you don't need to use a template and come up with a name for your project. Names that are not good, don't call it phase one final project. That's not a name that is very informative and not a name that you want to see like on your portfolio or on your GitHub. So you can change your repo name later, but still start with something that's a little more indicative of what the project is. So maybe you want to call this Microsoft Movie Analysis. Description you can add later. Make sure it's a public repo because I need to keep track of what you're doing as well. And with these options down here, we're going to add a README and add a git ignore. We had talked about git ignores really briefly when we talked about APIs, but with git ignores, GitHub actually really nicely can pre-populate your git ignore. So with git ignores, you can actually look for Python templates, and then it'll create it automatically for you. So once you do that, takes a while. You'll see here that we have a README file, which is something that we're going to edit towards the end of the project, but you also now have your GitHub repo. Now, before you go ahead with like cloning and adding files to this, what you're going to do is add your teammates as collaborators. And how you do that is through settings, manage access, I believe. Type in your password, and then invite a collaborator. So you'll invite your collaborators via either their email or their GitHub username. So ask your teammates for that information and you'll be able to add them. And the teammates will have to actually accept the invitations that will be sent via email. So teammates will receive an email with an invitation to join this repository So you just have to accept it through email. So now we have this. And once your collaborators are added, we go back to our repo. And what we want to do, we actually want to edit our git ignore really quickly. So git ignore, you can see automatically has all of these great things. I think some things that might be familiar. You can see here there's PyCache. I don't know if anyone's seen PyCache on their computer. Basically, when you're working on Jupyter Notebook, sometimes they have these cache files that are automatically generated. We don't want that to turn up on our GitHub repositories. Here there's also notebook checkpoints automatically created as well. There's also environment files. Might sound familiar when we were setting up our Learn environment, but we don't need those on our GitHub either. Several things that are not included here that we also want to add. So what we want to do first before starting anything else is edit our git ignore. And on this page, wait, hold on. On this page, I have a list of things that you should add. So SQL databases, usually you don't want on your page because typically databases can get pretty large. And if you try and upload any file bigger than, I don't know, I think like 100 megabytes, it will break GitHub. It won't break GitHub, but it'll be complicated to fix that problem. You have DSStore. DSStore is automatically generated and it's kind of annoying. And finally, your config file. And these are things that are not yet included in the automatically generated git ignore, so we want to add those. So let's just quickly copy and paste those in. Anywhere, I like to put them at the bottom, you can put them at the top, doesn't matter. And then commit changes. So right here, you can see that you have made your first commit, not including the initial commit. So now that we have that, let's see what's next. So now that we have this, each teammate can now clone down this repository. So if I was a teammate, I can copy this link and clone the repository. One thing to make sure you don't have to fork this repository because you are both equal collaborators, or all three of you are equal collaborators to this project. You don't actually need to fork. You really only fork something if you're going to branch off and make your own changes. But in this case, you don't have to fork. So for here, let's say I just want to do it on my desktop. So I'll just git clone and have my project here. So now my project is here. I'm going to cd into my project. And I can open it up in Jupyter Notebook. So once I have that, this open up here, put it here. So this is my project. Git ignore doesn't show up because it's a hidden file, but it's actually there. And now we just have this README file, which we'll worry about sometime next week. But you probably want to start working. And what you would do is you create a new Python 3 notebook. And with this, you can start by saying that, all right, maybe you want to do data cleaning. Oops, data cleaning. And then you can just work on your data cleaning. Questions so far? All right, things to note about multiple people working on a repository via Jupyter Notebooks. Every person should be only editing their own Jupyter Notebook. It's not the typical way things work in the real world because Jupyter Notebooks are typically more for testing, and then actual code is usually in Python files, which I'll talk about next phase actually. But you should only be editing your own Jupyter Notebook. It does make the process a little bit clunkier, but I still want you guys to get used to working with GitHub. Only work on your Jupyter Notebook because I don't know if anyone's ever taken a look at what a raw Jupyter Notebook looks like. Any ideas? All right, so let me just put something here. Let's say, all right, data cleaning, maybe I want to do part 1, and then let's import pandas. And then let's just say, all right, I'm going to stop here. Something that you should do, and what I actually want you all to do, is to commit your work daily. So in this case, let's say, all right, I'm done with this, save this, close it out. Command C. All right, So now that that's done, let's say I've reached some checkpoint and I want to save my work. Good thing to do is always push your work. So let's just do a quick git status to see. We can see that there's this new file that is not being tracked, my data cleaning notebook. So let's stage that, commit that. So git add, git commit, new cleaning notebook, and then git push. Once I do that, wait for that to push. Once I do that, if I refresh this, you can see that my notebook is there. And so why I want you guys to work on separate notebooks is because notebooks are actually really hard to merge. This is what a notebook looks like to us, rendered nicely with the cells if it would load. I think you all know what this is supposed to look like. But if I go to the raw of Jupyter Notebook, this is actually what a Jupyter Notebook is made out of. Jupyter Notebooks are actually written in JSON format. And every little change you make counts as an edit. For example, let me see if I have it here. Here. So here you can see I have like the data cleaning part 1. Let me make this a little bigger so we can see. Here I have like the data cleaning part 1. And then here I have a whole new cell. This entire thing is another cell. It's a code cell. Execution count, which is that little number at the left of the cell, is 1. So that means every time I even execute a cell, it's going to count as a change. And basically, let's say you are working on someone else's notebook and you run a bunch of cells. There's going to be a lot of changes happening in the JSON file that just makes it really, really hard to merge. You often run into conflicts. So because of that, I really recommend that you work on your own notebooks. So you can see that this is a cell that I had import pandas as PD in. So because of that, work on your own notebooks. Questions about that?
I still don't understand kind of like what the workflow should be and how would be a good way to divide up the work between partners so that it is like fluid, like we would do in a project and not like just two separate things.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you were talking about before.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually planning to talk about that after going through like all of these Git processes.
Okay.
But in short, definitely always be communicating. I'll go into more detail later, but always be communicating. And then typically for like the specific questions, you do split up the questions.
Okay.
And so I'll talk more in detail about that after all of this Git stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. So just to reiterate, don't work off someone else's notebook because merging will be hard.
So we'll each have our own notebooks for like cleaning, for example, and then just before we hand in the final deliverable, we'll kind of like combine the work we did into a new Jupyter notebook.
For this project, I will say like I am not looking for, you don't have to do the work of combining it if you're short on time, but definitely better to combine the work. So yeah, it's totally fine to submit separate notebooks, but it will look better for an employer if it was combined. But that's not my priority for you guys right now.
And so then if you each have a data cleaning, and you'd probably name it something like with your name at the end so that you can tell whose is whose, but then would it make sense to split up, I'm going to clean one database and the other person is going to clean another database?
Yeah, that's actually how some groups do it. I will say, because sometimes you want to use different databases together, one thing I highly recommend is talk about how you're going to be cleaning and what things you want to prioritize. You'll see that there are a lot of columns that are going to be provided. And so at least being on the same page about, all right, when I'm dealing with this data frame, don't drop this ID column because I'm going to need this ID column. So just like communicating that, I think is a good idea to like sit together and like have a discussion about, maybe talk about what questions you might potentially ask. Very likely you're going to go back and forth between like looking at your data and formulating your question, but starting with like a general sense of where you want to go first is a really good place to start. And yeah, sometimes groups like to do their cleaning separately. Like I think there are like 11 CSVs provided. So you can split that up. By the way, you don't have to use all of them, but you can split that work up. And then, yeah, you can clean things separately, but also I've seen some groups do their cleaning together before splitting off to answer their questions separately. All right, really quickly, I wanted to talk about branches branches was brought up in topic 2 when we're talking about Git, but we haven't really used branches yet aside from the solutions branch. Branches is a slightly cleaner way to work with multiple people on a single repo. Basically, very similar to how you would work with branches professionally, is that each person would have their work in progress branch before, and like basically you'll make all of your changes, finalize your changes on your own branch, and then only at specific checkpoints, you will merge your branches together. So I want to just quickly talk about how we're going to work with branches. So there are different ways you can create branches. Where is my repo? Here. Different ways you can create branches. First way, the way that I prefer because it's easier, just off of GitHub. You can see, wow, they changed it from master to main. That's awesome. They changed, it used to be called master branch. It had some connotation about slavery, so they changed that. So with that, you can create your own branch on GitHub. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So typically what people do is they do their own name dash work in progress, their own name or like the team name, whatever. So here I'm doing my name dash work in progress, and I can create my branch like this. Basically what creating a branch does, at whatever point you're creating the branch, it makes a copy of whatever was on the main branch and basically makes a copy onto your own branch. But now if I'm working on my work in progress branch, it won't affect anything on the main branch. Did that make sense? So this is the main.
Have, like,
oh,
your like clean data on like a main branch and then branch off to go do like your own separate analyses.
yeah,
And then
absolutely.
bring it back together.
Yeah, so you can actually create branches at different points. So maybe like, all right, let's split up the work of cleaning. We'll all work off different branches for cleaning. And once we're all done with cleaning, let's merge all the branches together. Now we only have main branch again. And then now to answer our questions, we can branch off a second time. That's definitely something we can do. So really quickly, working with branches, always a good idea to know what branch you're on, because many times I have made this mistake myself as well, is I ended up changing the main branch instead of my own branch. So one thing to look out for is to do, I think it's just git branch. Actually, no, first we're on the main branch. So if I do git branch, I think it should show me. Right, okay. So let me make this a little bigger and let me just clear this. So if I'm in my repo and I do git branch, it's gonna show me what branches there are locally and what branch I'm on. So right now, locally, it only recognizes the main. I'm gonna talk about why we haven't had, like why my branch isn't appearing yet, but it's highlighted green, it has a star because it's the current branch that I'm on. So the thing is, with branches, when you create a branch remotely, you actually have to tell Git that, all right, I actually have a remote branch, let's bring that remote branch down. So to do that, it's just git fetch. And then it says that once you fetch, we found a new branch. Let's just do git branch to take a look. Oh wait, no, not yet. Before we do that, we do git checkout. So when you want to change branches, you do git checkout. Git checkout, and then I can do yish, work in progress. And then there you go. Now it sets up the local branch of this. So if we remember, we actually talked about git fetch with our study group repo. Git fetch is just telling the repo, telling your local repo that there are some changes, but none of the changes have actually been implemented yet. So this git checkout implements that new branch locally. So now when I do git branch, you'll see that there's the main branch that's still there, but now I am on my own work in progress branch. So ideally what goes on now is I can work on my own stuff without worrying about any conflicts on other branches or the main branch. And so you don't have to do this because we're working on different notebooks and there shouldn't be conflicts anyways, but it's good to get used to. I'll make this part optional, like working on branches, optional. But basically now I can launch Jupyter Notebook. Let's close this one. Yeah, that was the first one I closed. And now I can make my own new notebook. Let's say, maybe I'm doing like my questions here. Let's define a function. Let's do that, save it, and close this out. Just an example. If I'm making changes, I can check git status. Git status will have what branch you're on, which is great, just to make sure. And then it's seeing that this is a new file that is not tracked yet. Oops. So let's just quickly git add and see what happens. New questions. All right, so now, since I've added things to my branch, this is my branch now. If I refresh it really quickly, I have a second notebook. And also, if I go back to the main, that notebook isn't there. And so let's say what I have on my notebook is final, and I like what I have. We're gonna do a compare and pull request. If this button doesn't show up, you can do that here. So in the pull requests, basically a pull request is what you wanna do when you wanna merge. It's what you wanna do when you wanna merge branches. So create a new pull request, compare my work in progress branch to the main branch. And with this process, it looks kind of complicated, but I always say just click the green buttons. With this process, you can see, all right, this is all the new stuff. Git and GitHub are really good at tracking changes. So if you made like specific changes, all of this will change. But anyways, because this is a completely new file, there shouldn't be any conflicts. We'll be able to create this pull request, any comments if you want, and you can create it. Because now we can merge the pull request. And once we've merged it, everything new that I had on my work in progress branch is now also in the main branch. So because of that, my work in progress branch is redundant. I can delete it. Perfect. One thing to remember here is if I do git status now, oops, if I say git status now, it says that I'm still on this branch. Always remember, if you make any change to your repo up here, you're gonna have to make that change down here. So what I usually do is I just usually try to do a git pull. All right, so once I do a git pull, where did I do that? I started here. Once I did this git pull, it saw that I made some changes here. There were some merges here, and all should be good. So let me just double check really quickly. I think if I do git branch, still in my branch, but I think, let me just double check really quick. I think this should be good to just go over to the main branch. There we go. Because I was on this branch that was merged already, nothing really happened. But now you can see that on my main branch, I am behind. So all I have to do now is do a git pull. There we go. Green is good. So let's do a git status. And we're all good. So now this is my main branch. If I ever need to branch off again, I can just create a new branch and then do that whole process over again. Questions?
I'm not clear what the difference is between a fetch and a pull.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Fetch and pull, basically fetch is the first step of a pull. So pull, doing a git pull includes doing a fetch and merge. So fetch plus merge equals to pull. Pull is basically doing everything at once. Git fetch just sort of tells your repo, okay, there are some changes that are there, but they don't implement the changes. If you do a git fetch, usually it's followed by a git merge or a git pull because you can just do that first part again. But git fetch tells it that there are changes without implementing them. The merge part or the pull part implements those changes.
But you were able to do a get fetch to get the new branch, and then you just checked it out. You didn't have to pull the new branch down.
So that's a good question, because it's a little bit different with branches. I know it's kind of a lot of different things going. Let me see when I was doing that. With my git branch here, I think, right. So this is where I did the git fetch, and it like recognized that there is a new branch. Let me make this a little bigger so you can see. Here was the first git fetch that I did, recognize that there was a new branch. When I did git branch, see the new branch wasn't implemented yet. So the branch equivalent of doing like a merge or a pull is doing git checkout. So here is when I git checkout the same name, my branch name. And then here you can see that my local branch was set up to check the remote branch here. And so this step is more of like the equivalent of like merging and pulling. Yeah, hopefully that clarifies. Yeah, there's a lot of little things that are all over the place. But yeah. A lot of questions that I get during project time is about Git. So no worries, if you run into any errors, screenshot it and send it to me. Let's see, anything else that I wanted to talk about? I have some other notes on the on this project flow document. So take a read when you can. I have some like tips and tricks. You can create branches at GitHub, but you can also do it locally. Most people do it on GitHub. I basically say here, work off your own things. And if you need another file from another branch, you can do this. That's actually a pretty neat function that a student actually shared with me. If let's say your partner has cleaned their files and you want to import those clean CSVs, you can do this to get the file from one branch to your branch without having to do the merge. That's really neat. And this part I talked about, basically doing all the green button things. So want to talk about typically how people split up the work. But before that, any questions regarding Git? I realized that was a lot of information. So if anyone has any questions, just feel free to shoot me a message, screenshot all your errors. I'll definitely help with that part. Okay, so if there are no questions about the Git part, really quickly want to talk about how people usually split up the work. As you can see, oh, I didn't really talk about this either. So access to the zip data. Let me just quickly talk about this. I can't believe we forgot this, but all the data lives in this repo, in this like phase 1 project repo. So over here, if you click onto the Octocat, the data is here. So what you would actually have to do is clone this repo and then just copy and paste the zip data into your own repo folder. As you can see here, there are 11 data files. You don't have to use all of them. I think most people end up using a lot of the IMDb ones because they have like similar IDs. But other ones are also usable. The .gz, don't worry about it. It actually reads the same way as a CSV. So if you just do the read CSV, you'll be able to read it normally, even though it has a .gz. I checked all of them, so should be fine. Some of them, you might have to deal with encoding errors, but I'll leave that to you all to Google and figure out. That's a fun one to figure out. So yeah, just letting you know that to access these data files, you've got to clone this and then just drag whatever CSVs you want to work with into your project repo that you had cloned down. All right, now with splitting the work. As I sort of briefly mentioned earlier, I highly recommend that you're just communicating about where your project is going. I think a good place to start is just like looking at this data, or if you prefer, because this data is a little all over the place, or if you prefer, I have a couple data sources here, these APIs, and the numbers is a pretty good one to scrape. These APIs have, you can sort of see what data you can get from there. So a really good idea to start is just look at the columns and look at the data that's available and start formulating, if not exact questions, like directions of questions. Like let's say you want to focus your presentation on like revenue. Basically, you're going to be cleaning your data around revenue. If you want to talk about genres, maybe you want to do that. I think one of the data sets also has like different actors and directors. So definitely talk about how you will want to clean things. In your decision-making process during your cleaning, like for example, you're faced with, oh my gosh, I have a lot of null values. What should I do here? Good idea to talk about it or just clarify. Like, all right, I have like 20% of my values missing. Do you think it's a good idea to drop this or not? Should be something that you both agree on. So I expect a lot of communication to be happening. So just know that that's normal. the cleaning part, I have seen groups like do all the cleaning together in a paired programming way where like literally like everything's done off of one computer, switching off in that way. So pros and cons. One pro is that, you know, you're always on the same page, but it does take quite a bit longer. So it's kind of up to you. I will say like the analysis part doesn't take as long as you think it will. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's kind of up to you to figure out. I have that suggested timeline so you can sort of like gauge how long things are taking. And for the question part, I will say 4 to 5 questions. Usually you come up with questions and then each person takes like 2 questions. 4 to 5 minimum. If you want to answer more questions, by all means, because sometimes there are like there's like a lot of small questions that are kind of related to each other. It's like groups of questions. So that might be something as well. So hopefully that answers the question about like working together. But at any point, if anything needs to be clarified, feel free to ping me on Slack. Or, you know, I love to see, usually during projects is when I see a lot of discussion happening on the Slack channel about like, how are people handling this column of data? Or like, are people even looking at this data set? Anybody working with APIs? I know one of, not my cohorts, but a different instructor's cohort, a bunch of them got together and figured out the API together, which was awesome because basically they put all of their heads together and got a really nice set of clean data. And so maybe that's something that you all want to do. Definitely the more collaboration, I think the easier things will go. So I think that's all I have about the projects. Further details will come during each office hour. I have like a little thing planned for each, but all the study group times next week will be for you all to like ask me questions, and I'll be maybe presenting like 20 to 30 minutes of like a specific thing at every one, just so you know like what those will look like. Any overall questions about the project? Cool. If by today you don't hear from your project partner, please let me know.
You said you have a timeline that suggested the data cleaning like be all done by Wednesday. So I'm thinking that we are going to formulate our, I mean, you have to look at the data and then formulate your questions and then clean it.
It's really a back and forth process. So sometimes like you come up with some questions, and then in cleaning your data, you realize, okay, maybe I can't really answer this specific question. Then you end up tweaking it a little bit. It is like an iterative process of like cleaning data, editing your question, cleaning data, editing your question. So this is a very rough timeline. But yeah, just know that like cleaning very, very normally takes like more than half of the project week. Cleaning or like the getting of the data. And it's really up to you guys which one you want to do. I will say people who figure out one of the APIs tend to have cleaner data to begin with. So it's less of like the, you know, what do I do with null values? What do I do with these like random outliers from like 1930? I think there are a few rows with like movies from like the 1930s. So yeah, kind of up to you. Anything else? All right, I will stop this recording and then we can get into our feelings.